What's up, guys? Vector time again. But not really. This video is not fully focused on Vector and how good he is right now. This is a follow-up to the other strategy video, but this one is probably the most important video for your success. So tune in, keep notes, let's do it.
Let the lesson begin.
Alright guys, Akariss here, bringing you another Fire Heroes video. Today's video is going to feature basically a follow-up to the previous Gale Force video, but this one is about tanking. And as simple as it is, and probably everyone's like default when it comes to like what strategy they'll probably use, and of course we're talking about Aether Raids here, most people will do this without even looking up a guide or anything like that, but it is important to cover it, and it's important to make sure that you set yourself up for success, and that's what we're going to focus on here. So I'll start with a sample team, what you should look like, to make this, get this going, and we're going to look at allies, supports. That is definitely very important for success, especially with tanking, where it's basically all about stats. And finally, the best candidates, both currently in the 5-star pool and F2P. Of course, I will obviously miss some units. We're talking like over 600 characters and heroes now, and it feels like every single video at this point is like, but you forgot that. What about this? How about that? Let me make this clear, folks. You can literally succeed in this game with whatever you want and whoever you want, and you'll do just fine if you have the good preparation, good planning, and execution to make that work. You could literally, succeed with Ray, and he's not even bad, but I'm just like saying, you could succeed with anything you want. But I'm going to focus, of course, on meta and what is consistently going to work against most teams, good matchups. And with that being said, let's get this going. So first up is a sample team. It's going to look like this. In light season, you don't have the 6th unit yet, or you do. It would probably be Dagger, I guess. And then you would probably, depends. You would be running either double or triple mythic alongside your carries, right? So in this scenario, I have 3 mythics merged up. That contributes to my score, who are Blessing, Hector, and Corrin. And this is assuming that either Air, Peony, or Mila are the current bonus units. If Dagger was a bonus, then unfortunately I wouldn't be able to run like Corrin here, because I wouldn't have Dagger. But essentially what this is the same makeup with any type of team you run. Your carry and your support. In Gale Force and Vantage, this is still applicable. Like in a Vantage strategy, you would want, your carry Vantage unit like Matthew, and then like a Dancer for that extra auxiliary slot. In the case of tanking here, we have obviously the tank, which is Hector, and Corrin, which is the support, right? And that can be, the support is pretty interchangeable, but I'd say the most impactful when it comes to tanking is going to be supports that can either provide some sort of long-range buffs or support, which is very rare. There's not really that many units that can do this, and of course the within 2 range kind of condition support units. So again, your blessings and blessings on mythics always help. 5 HP and stats. I'm not gonna apply any blessing stats to the builds I show you in a moment, but because everyone has different scenarios, so those always help and definitely swing matchups in your favor. One thing I will always recommend though when it comes to your tank strategies, and hopefully you just use like 1 or maybe 2, but ideally 1. If you have Fat Pass, you can definitely do more than 1, but if you don't, like I do, it's only 1. Always summon or support your tank. They are the best use of that summon or support. They use all the stats. The HP, the attack, the speed, defense, and res always gets value out of that strategy. The other strategies, I can't say the same thing. Of course, your Gale Force, they probably use attack speed, for example, or Vantage maybe just wants attack out of summoner support, so they don't get as much value. It's not always the case, but it is a very common thing. Okay, so first up, we got to talk supports, right? Supports are what make or break tanking strategies. A lot of the builds you'll see in today's video are going to hopefully assume you have Lucina, but if you don't worry, I understand. I still don't have Lucina, so I know how that feels, and you can definitely get by without her depending on which tank you choose to use. But Lucina is a great boon for that. Again, with the builds, it's interchangeable with anything you see in the video. Make use of what you have, but understand the underlying concept here. So Lucina is going to basically shove and try to soak the attack and speed off of whoever she's shoving by using the attack speed link, Hopefully you have like defense and res tactic on your team, or someone else providing defense res link, for example, with a positional. Those are the concepts behind it. That's why life and death is there. And of course you have your C and seal contributing to stats. If you don't have Lucina, that's okay. We have other options. And the first up and most obvious one is Corrin. You don't need +10, +15. That just helps to make sure he survives or is able to clean up different scenarios, or of course to soak defense res buffs in this case, or attack speed off of whatever tank you choose to do. Soaking, of course, if you don't remember, is basically bright shrines or dark shrines hitting the support unit rather than the tank, assuming the tank can't remove penalties. That's really important because you don't want your tank being debuffed and losing the value out of its stats. That's why it's good to merge up your supports and be able to do that. Finally, Mathilda here is another great option. The great thing about Mathilda is she is a cav. She's blue, so it contrasts with, like, let's say a red tank or a green tank, and has slaying, so can use something like Gale Force with Heavy Blade if you really wanted to, for example, and gives you a little bit more of a robust unit compared to the other two supports mentioned. Some other supports, there's more of them. There's tons you can use. Obviously, like Flame, I didn't show here. NY Valoria for like mages and whatnot. But I'm just assuming the most common supports that people have. There's tons you can definitely use. With that being said, though, let's jump into the first and most obvious premium choice here, which is Hector. Now, I'm sure not many of you or all of you might even have Hector, might not even have Far Save or Special Fighter. And if you don't, that's fine. I'll show you a budget build of him. But essentially, this is a great unit to use. You don't need the Res IV, but it is pretty impactful since it's like the one thing he's weak to, which is magical damage. So Hector is insane because he removes penalties, he lowers attack and defense of enemies, he has the best distant counter, a slot, he has a slaying weapon, he's not an armor. I mean, literally, that's what his weapon does. It removes his weakness. So, of course, you can see why he's so good. And at low merges, he still is really good because he still has a fairly min-maxed stat spread, meaning that his speed is on the lower end and distributed into the other stats instead. But if you don't have Hector, that's fine. We're going to go on. And in terms of Hector himself, more budgets would use something like Wrath with Bonfire. Hopefully you have Lucina. If you don't have Lucina, then you got to run something like Noontime with a solo seal and like Wrath to give you some boost in damage off of your specials, just for contrast, of course. And you'd probably want to like attack stat here because you wouldn't be getting the damage out of Bonfire in this case. But moving on, next tank is of course Bike. So if you have Bike from way back when, or the free Bike that we get from the hero path, such and what, you can use this pretty effectively. However, Bike basically wants to always be with Lucina. If he's not, it becomes a lot less consistent, and you'd probably use a different special than Aether, for example. So people have adjusted to Bike, but he's still extremely good, especially if you have him merged up, especially if you have the Resplendent version of him, and especially if you have Lucina. He's still going to work against most teams. I do recommend Null Follow-Up over Null C Disrupt, because if you don't use Null Follow-Up and you don't speed stack him, he's hard countered by Hardy Bearing, and that is a big oof, especially when that second hit ends up being some sort of special that just blows through his low res stat otherwise. Moving on is more recent addition being Winter Altina. Winter Altina is great because she has a dual phase, very min-max stat spread. And honestly, her biggest weakness, I feel, is going to be that A slot. I feel like Winter Altina doesn't actually want to be using something like Attack Res Unity in A, despite it being fairly good. I feel that Mirror Stance 3 or something like Fierce Breath are going to get way better value in the A slot. Fierce Breath making her more independent, not relying on Lucina to basically always get her special, but Mirror Stance really helps her survive units who do survive the double, and then kill her back with some crazy special. For example, I use a Slaying Lance Ignis Dancing Eldigan, and he would not be able to kill her because she would be using Mirror Stance. That's just a small example of that A skill being very important in having her succeed. And again, more recent, Brave Edition, who will definitely age well, and not really an armor in the case of mobility here. Does want Lucina to really use this build effectively, because you'd be firing off bonfires with Mystic Boost giving you that healing. But if you don't have something like this, you can still run noontime and give yourself more of the attack throughput by using like attack defense solo in contrast. Great unit, great for cleanup, great, actually has a player phase, but again, I guess her one weakness is that she shares some problem matchups with Bike, and if someone's assuming Bike as a counter for their defense team, they're probably assuming that Brave Edelgard might hit them too. So that's a little bit of a problem. Now we're going to jump more into the F2P options. Again, a lot of this stuff has premium fodder, but you can find a lot of it in the Path 2 codes, so you can start saving for that if you wanted to use a tank like this, or hopefully you get it at some point down the road, whether that's Legendary, Mythic, Double Special, whatever type of banners. You ideally get something like this. Now, Nowi really depends on Dragon Wall to really make her good, and I covered this in the Dragon Wall video from about a month ago, so if you haven't watched that, it'll be here. But if you don't have that, that's okay. Null Follow-Up and essentially Null Sea Disrupt are also great alternatives. They just provide different types of usage on Nowi. Nowi's great, especially if you're basically starting out, because she removes penalties as long as she's over 50% health. That's not that difficult to accomplish, and she does a decent stat spread combined with her flowers. This is probably the entry point here, especially if you don't have distant counter, which could be the gate from having you use many of the other tanks. Next up is Laslow, and Laslow, similarly to Winter Altina, is a great option, especially since he can be merged up and has access to 15 flowers. He also can use some like speed oriented skills, which is why I have Spurn here. If you consider that you'll just end up buffing his speed through stuff like Peony or Mila, or even use a speed boon over an attack boon, he actually has a fairly decent speed stat spread, and he can be really good at damage reduction that doesn't rely on flat bulk like Winter Altina does. So yeah, he can still use Null Follow-Up and Null Sea Disrupt, no problem, but something that is unique to Laslow here is Spurn, and he's a great unit for this. He actually has a really good attack stat from like first gen units, so I feel like he's forgotten a bit, but he's a great candidate for this. Next up is Gangrel, and to a lesser extent Norn could be here too, with Spendthrift. So there's characters I haven't covered in this video, and you know, you don't need to like freak out. You can use anything you want. Bronya isn't in this video either, actually, and she's a great option as an FTP option, but I wanted to cover Gangrel in here. So a lot of people I know use Gangrel, and that's because he gets a lot of value from his weapon, which does defense res smoke, and then does true damage based off of his res stat, which is always going to give you something out of it. He has an insanely good speed stat, which means for a null follow-up unit, he's almost uncontested in countering anything and winning against those matchups. I'd say his biggest weakness is his defense, so too many defensive threats on Aether Raids will give him a problem, but the thing is, it's more heavily magical based when you run into teams as opposed to defense-based nukes, and therefore Gangrel sits pretty comfily as a decent tank option. Then, most recently added to the game is Innis, and actually because of his defense super boon and a better defense stat spread than I thought he would get, he actually makes a decent carry unit, and a lot of the value comes from his bow actually. So in a situation where people start using a lot of damage reduction units on air defense, he could fit very nicely into countering that sort of meta. So he doesn't have the greatest defensive stat spread, but he does make up for it with a great attack and speed stat spread, and his bow having a great niche of just cutting through tons of problem, let's say, units on defense. Similarly, like Shinin is like the premium option to this, but Shinin would have to rely on Deadeye to really cut through damage reduction. So I think Innis' unique ability to be used as a carry with his bow is really good. Alternatively, you could give him Spendthrift or Plegium Bow, but I mean, at that point, he's basically just a different type of Norn and even has a fairly similar stat spread, I believe. So realistically, I like this as another option. That's going to cover all the tanks that I want to talk about in this video. There are so many more, but I'm not planning to make a 40-minute video here. I just wanted to get you thinking, and if you were to choose one strategy for trying to succeed in Aether Raids, it has to be a tank. It has to be the most invested that you could do, and that is where you got to start. Make sure you have a really good tank strat, because a tank strat will basically be used more than half the time if you have a really good one, and then you complement it with the other strategies like Gale Force, which again is the other video I covered, but I will go into Vantage and Hidden Run in a future video. So thank you guys for watching. As always, much love. hit the thumbs up. That always helps with it, the algorithms and whatnot. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Love you all. See you in the next one. Peace.
It's over.